A cop stops a car and freezes, because the little girl in the back seat looks just like his daughter who vanished 5 years ago. Then he sees it, the bracelet on her wrist. It's identical to the one he gave his daughter before she disappeared. Could this be a coincidence, or is she the key to uncovering the truth? And what secrets is her mother hiding? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Officer Luke Callahan guided his patrol car through the familiar streets of Cedar Grove. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as memories of another autumn day 5 years ago threatened to overwhelm him. "Daddy, look what I made," Emily's voice echoed in his mind, clear as yesterday. She had been so proud of that little beaded bracelet, her first attempt at jewelry making. Pink and purple beads with a tiny silver heart charm that caught the light just so. Luke blinked hard, forcing himself back to the present. These memories always hit harder during fall, when the maple trees turned the same fiery red as Emily's hair. 5 years of searching, of following every lead, of hoping against hope, and still, his little girl remained missing. A silver sedan rolled through a stop sign, pulling Luke from his reverie. He flicked on his lights, grateful for the distraction. The car pulled over promptly, and Luke approached with practiced caution, notepad in hand. "License and registration, please," he said, leaning down to peer through the driver's window. A woman with kind eyes looked up at him apologetically. "I'm so sorry, officer," she said, fumbling in her purse. "I could have sworn I came to a complete stop." "It's okay, Mommy," a small voice piped up from the back seat. "Everyone makes mistakes sometimes." Luke's heart stopped. The voice, so similar to Emily's. His eyes shifted to the rearview mirror, where he caught sight of a young girl, around 10 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She smiled at him, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. "Here you go, officer," the woman, Sarah Matthews according to her license, said, handing over her documents. Luke forced himself to focus on the paperwork, but his peripheral vision caught movement in the back seat. The girl, Clara, he heard her mother call her, was playing with something on her wrist. A bracelet, pink and purple beads, a silver heart charm. His pen froze mid-word. That's a pretty bracelet you have there," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. Clara beamed. "Thank you. I found it at the park last week. Mom said if nobody claims it, I can keep it." The world tilted sideways. Luke gripped the car door, steadying himself. It couldn't be. The chances were astronomical. But that bracelet, he'd helped Emily string those beads himself, watched her tiny fingers work with such concentration. "Officer, are you all right?" Sarah's concerned voice cut through his shock. Luke straightened, professional training kicking in despite his racing heart. "Yes, ma'am. Just a warning today. Please come to a complete stop next time." "Thank you, officer, we will," Clara called out cheerfully as he handed back the documents. Her smile was so bright, so familiar it hurt. Luke watched them drive away, his mind spinning. He'd seen hundreds of little girls over the years, each one a painful reminder of Emily. But this, the bracelet, the hair, the voice, it was too much to be coincidence. Or was grief finally making him crack? He sat in his patrol car, hands trembling as he picked up his phone to run Sarah Matthews' information. A simple traffic stop had just shattered the careful walls he'd built around his pain, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. But hope was dangerous. He'd learned that lesson too many times over the past 5 years. Still, as he watched the sedan disappear around the corner, Luke knew he wouldn't be able to let this go. Not until he knew for sure. Luke's footsteps echoed through his empty house as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway seemed longer tonight, stretching endlessly toward that closed door at the end. Emily's room. He rarely went in there anymore. The pain was usually too raw, too sharp, but tonight was different. His hand trembled as he turned the doorknob. The room was exactly as she'd left it that morning 5 years ago. Pink walls, stuffed animals arranged carefully on the bed, and a corkboard filled with photos and drawings. The air felt thick with memories. Luke sank onto Emily's small bed, the springs creaking under his weight. He reached for the photo album on her nightstand, its corners worn from countless hours of flipping through pages. The first photo made his throat tight. Emily on her 8th birthday, beaming at the camera, her new bracelet prominently displayed on her tiny wrist. "Look, Daddy," she had squealed that morning, "it's perfect." He remembered helping her string those beads one by one, pink and purple, her favorite colors. The silver heart charm had been special. He'd had it engraved at the local jeweler's. To M, "Love, Dad," in tiny letters on the back. Their secret, he'd told her. Something only they would know about. Luke's police training kicked in, his mind cataloging details from earlier that day. Clara's bracelet hadn't just looked similar. It had been identical. The same pattern of beads, the same silver heart charm catching the sunlight. His hands shook as he set down the album. Moving to his home office, Luke booted up his computer. The police database hummed to life, and he typed in Sarah Matthews' information. Her record came up clean, almost too clean. Driver's license issued 3 years ago in Cedar Grove. No prior addresses listed, no employment history. Just nothing. He dug deeper, searching for Clara Matthews. School records showed she'd been homeschooled until this year. No birth certificate on file, no medical records. The more Luke looked, the more his cop instincts screamed that something wasn't right. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. Normal families had history, paper trails, roots. Sarah and Clara seemed to have appeared out of nowhere 3 years ago. Luke returned to Emily's room, drawn to the photo album again. He studied another picture, a close-up of Emily showing off her bracelet. His heart pounded as he remembered the engraving. If Clara's bracelet was really Emily's, if it wasn't just some cosmic coincidence, the realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't checked the back of Clara's charm. That tiny engraving would be proof, concrete evidence that the bracelet was Emily's. His training warred with his emotions. Follow proper police procedure or act on his gut instinct. Luke sat there in Emily's room, surrounded by her things, feeling the weight of possibility crushing his chest. If that bracelet was Emily's, what did it mean? Where had Clara found it? And why did Sarah Matthews seem to have no past? The questions swirled in his mind, making sleep impossible. He'd learned to live with uncertainty over the years, learned to function despite the constant ache of not knowing. But now, for the first time in 5 years, he felt something dangerous stirring in his chest. Hope. The next morning, Luke sat in his unmarked police car, parked across from the Cedar Grove Community Center. He'd called in sick for the first time in 3 years, knowing he couldn't focus on regular patrol work, not with these questions burning in his mind. At precisely 9:45 a.m., Sarah's blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Luke's heart rate quickened as he watched Clara hop out, clutching an art portfolio to her chest. Her blonde ponytail bounced as she skipped toward the building's entrance, reminding him so much of Emily that it physically hurt. Through the large windows of the art studio, he could see Clara setting up at an easel. She moved with the same careful precision Emily had shown when working on her drawings. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the slight tilt of her head as she concentrated, it was like watching a ghost. "Focus," Luke muttered to himself, forcing his attention back to Sarah. She hadn't left immediately like most parents did. Instead, she lingered in the parking lot, checking her phone repeatedly as if waiting for an important message. After 15 minutes, Sarah finally drove away. Luke followed at a safe distance, keeping 3 cars between them at all times. She pulled into the local cafe, the Daily Grind, and took a seat at an outdoor table. Within minutes, another woman joined her. Luke recognized her as Jenny Miller, whose daughter also attended art classes. He parked across the street and rolled down his window, straining to hear their conversation over the morning traffic. "Must have been hard moving to a new town," Jenny was saying, stirring her coffee. Sarah nodded, her shoulders tense. "It was necessary. Clara and I needed a fresh start after everything." "You never did say where you moved from," Jenny pressed gently. "Oh, we moved around a lot," Sarah replied, her laugh sounding forced. "Sometimes it's better to leave the past in the past, you know." Luke's trained eye caught the subtle signs of deception, the way Sarah's fingers drummed nervously on the table. how she avoided direct eye contact, the slight strain in her voice. These were tells he'd observed in countless interrogations over the years. Back at the community center, Luke watched Clara's art class through the windows. She was painting with watercolors, her face lit up with concentration. Another girl knocked over a cup of water, and Clara immediately jumped up to help clean the spill. The kindness in her gesture, the gentle way she patted the other girl's shoulder, it was exactly what Emily would have done. Luke's phone buzzed with a text from the station asking when he'd be back. He ignored it, unable to tear himself away from his surveillance. The rational part of his mind knew he was walking a dangerous line. He had no warrant, no probable cause, just an identical bracelet and a gut feeling that wouldn't let go. As he watched Clara gather her art supplies at the end of class, Luke's chest tightened with conflicting emotions. The cop in him said to step back, gather evidence properly, follow procedure. But the father in him saw his little girl in every movement Clara made, heard Emily's laugh in Clara's voice, recognized his daughter's spirit in Clara's kindness. Sarah returned to pick up Clara, and Luke observed their interaction closely. Their relationship seemed genuine enough. Clara ran to Sarah with a hug, proudly showing off her painting. But there was something in Sarah's constant scanning of their surroundings, the way she hurried Clara to the car, that set off warning bells in Luke's mind. Back at the station that evening, Luke found Officer Diana Ramos at her desk, reviewing case files. He'd known Diana for 12 years, and she was one of the few people who'd been there through his darkest days after Emily's disappearance. "Diana, got a minute?" Luke's voice was low, hesitant. She looked up, reading the tension in his face immediately. "Of course. Break room?" Once they were alone, Luke pulled out his phone and showed her 2 photos side by side, one of Emily wearing her bracelet, and a zoomed-in shot he'd taken of Clara's wrist during the traffic stop. "Look at these," he said, his hand slightly trembling. "They're identical. Even the engraving I had custom-made for Emily." Diana studied the photos carefully, her brow furrowed. "Luke, when's the last time you got a full night's sleep?" "This isn't about that," he insisted, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've been watching them, Diana. This girl, Clara, she moves like Emily, talks like Emily, and her mother, Sarah. Something's not right there." Diana set the phone down and looked at him with gentle concern. "Luke, grief can make us see connections that aren't there. We all wanted to find Emily so badly." "Remember that witness?" Luke interrupted, his mind racing back 5 years. "The gas station attendant who saw a man with Emily that night?" Diana nodded slowly. "Mr. Peterson. He saw a man buying snacks with a little girl matching Emily's description. But the security footage was too grainy, and Peterson couldn't give us enough details for a sketch. What if that man is connected to Clara somehow? What if he's part of something bigger?" Luke pulled out a notepad filled with his hasty scribbles. "I've been looking into Sarah's background. She claims they moved around a lot, but there are gaps I can't explain." "Luke," Diana's voice carried a warning note. "I know how it sounds," he admitted, "but I need to look into the foster care system. Clara was in foster care before Sarah adopted her, that's what their records show. But what if those records aren't telling the whole story?" Diana leaned back in her chair, concern etched on her face. "You're talking about accessing confidential files. Without probable cause, that could cost you your badge." "My daughter is worth more than my badge," Luke said quietly, the words heavy with emotion. Back at his desk, Luke began diving into the database of unsolved foster care cases. His computer screen cast a blue glow over his tired face as he scrolled through report after report. Children who'd vanished from the system, paperwork that didn't quite add up, foster parents whose backgrounds seemed too clean to be real. The words began to blur together as midnight approached. Luke's coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. His mind kept going back to that gas station witness, Mr. Peterson. The man had been so sure about what he'd seen. A tall man in a dark jacket buying candy and chips while a little girl in a pink sweater waited quietly by his side. Emily had been wearing her favorite pink sweater that day. Luke opened another file, his eyes catching on a pattern he hadn't noticed before. Several cases involved children whose adoption records showed frequent moves just like Clara and Sarah. In each case, the paper trail before the adoption was surprisingly thin. He started making notes, drawing connections between dates and locations. With each new detail, the knot in his stomach grew tighter. Either he was letting his grief create patterns where none existed, as Diana suggested, or he was uncovering something much darker than a simple traffic stop. The address Luke had found for Eric Matthews was a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the oil-stained concrete as Luke pulled into the parking lot. His heart was pounding, though he kept his exterior calm and professional. A tall man in grease-covered overalls emerged from beneath a lifted truck. He wiped his hands on a rag as Luke approached, revealing calloused fingers and weathered skin that spoke of years of manual labor. "Eric Matthews?" Luke asked, showing his badge. "I'm Officer Luke Callahan. Got a minute to talk?" Eric's face tightened with concern. "Sarah okay? Clara?" "They're fine," Luke assured him quickly. "I'm just following up on some routine matters." He kept his tone casual, though his mind was racing with questions. They moved to a small office in the back of the shop. The space was cramped but neat, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk covered in invoices. Eric settled into his chair, still looking wary. "Sarah's my half-sister," Eric explained, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We don't talk much these days, not since she moved away with Clara." Luke nodded, choosing his next words carefully. "How long has Clara been with Sarah?" Eric's expression clouded. "About 3 years, I think. Sarah always wanted kids, you know, but she couldn't have them. Medical issue she was born with." He shook his head sadly. Nearly broke her heart. She tried everything. Fertility treatments, surgeries, nothing worked. Luke felt his pulse quicken. This was new information, something that hadn't shown up in any of his searches. "Then Clara came along?" "Yeah," Eric said, but there was something uncertain in his voice. "Sarah said she adopted her, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" Luke prompted gently. Eric shifted in his chair. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble for my sister, she's been through enough. But the whole thing with Clara, it was just weird. Sarah wouldn't tell us anything about the adoption. No pictures from the agency, no paperwork she'd show us, just showed up one day with this little girl and said she was her daughter now." Luke's mind raced back to the gaps he'd found in Sarah's records, the mysterious moves from town to town. "Did you ever meet Clara before Sarah brought her home?" "Nope. Sarah had kind of pulled away from the family by then, said she needed space." Eric leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Officer, is something wrong? Is Sarah in some kind of trouble?" "Just trying to get all the facts straight," Luke assured him, though his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong indeed. "One more question. Did Sarah ever mention where Clara came from? Any details about her birth family?" Eric shook his head. "Nothing. And believe me, Mom tried to ask. Sarah would just get real quiet and change the subject. After a while, we stopped asking." Luke thanked Eric for his time and walked back to his car, his mind whirling with this new information. Sarah's inability to have children, the sudden appearance of Clara, the lack of adoption documentation. It all pointed to something deeper, something darker than he'd initially suspected. As he drove back into town, Luke made a decision. He needed to watch Sarah and Clara more closely. There were too many questions now, too many pieces that didn't fit together. He thought of Emily's bracelet on Clara's wrist and felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm afternoon sun. The late morning sun warmed the playground at Miller Park as Luke sat in his unmarked car, watching Sarah and Clara from a discreet distance. He'd chosen a spot beneath a large oak tree that gave him a clear view while keeping his presence subtle. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. Clara's laughter carried across the park as she swung higher and higher on the swings, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. The sight made Luke's chest tighten. It was exactly how Emily used to swing, leaning back at the highest point, face turned toward the sky in pure joy. "Higher, Mom," Clara called out to Sarah, who stood nearby with a proud smile. "I want to touch the clouds." Luke's throat constricted. Emily had said those exact words to him countless times. He watched as Clara jumped off at the peak of her swing, landing with the same graceful bounce that Emily had perfected after dozens of attempts. Sarah clapped, praising Clara's landing, but then her posture suddenly changed. She stiffened, her head turning slowly until her eyes locked directly onto Luke's car. Even from this distance, he could see the color drain from her face. She quickly called Clara over, speaking to her in hushed tones. Clara nodded and headed toward the playground's monkey bars while Sarah marched purposefully toward Luke's car, her face set in determined anger. Luke knew he should drive away, knew he was crossing a line, but he couldn't move. Sarah reached his car and rapped sharply on the window. With a deep breath, he rolled it down. "What do you think you're doing?" Sarah's voice trembled with barely contained fury. "Are you following us?" "Mrs. Matthews, I can explain." "No," she cut him off, glancing back to make sure Clara was out of earshot. "You're scaring me, Officer Callahan. First the traffic stop, then I see you around town, and now this?" Her eyes glistened with tears of anger and fear. "What do you want from us?" Luke stepped out of his car, maintaining a professional distance. "The bracelet Clara wears. I need to know where she got it." Sarah's hand flew to her throat. "What does that matter?" "Because I gave that exact bracelet to my daughter 5 years ago," Luke's voice cracked, "before she disappeared. It has an engraving inside. To Emily, love, Dad." Sarah's face went pale, but she quickly recovered. "That's impossible. Clara's bracelet was a gift from her birth mother." "Then you won't mind if I check the engraving?" "Stay away from my daughter." Sarah's voice rose, causing several nearby parents to turn their heads. "I don't know what you think is going on, but Clara is my child. I have done nothing wrong." "Then explain the adoption," Luke pressed. "Show me the paperwork. Tell me where she came from." Sarah's lips trembled. "I don't have to explain anything to you. You're not investigating a crime. You're harassing an innocent family because you can't let go of your own tragedy." The words hit Luke like a physical blow. He watched as tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I'm warning you, Officer Callahan. Stay away from us or I'll file a formal complaint." She backed away, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry about your daughter, truly, but Clara isn't her. She's mine." Luke stood rooted to the spot as Sarah hurried back to Clara, quickly gathering their things. His training told him to back off, to handle this through proper channels. But as he watched them leave the park, Clara's bracelet glinting in the sunlight, his father's heart screamed that he was letting his daughter slip away all over again. Luke sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by scattered case files and photographs that spilled across the wooden surface. The evening light cast long shadows through his windows, but he barely noticed the passing hours. His encounter with Sarah at the park kept replaying in his mind, each detail more haunting than the last. He picked up a worn photograph of Emily taken just weeks before she vanished. She was beaming at the camera, missing her front tooth, her small hands proudly displaying a science fair ribbon. The same infectious smile he'd seen on Clara's face at the park today. "I miss you so much, sweetheart," he whispered, his finger tracing the outline of Emily's face. The memory crashed over him like a wave, that terrible afternoon 5 years ago. Emily had been walking home from school, just 3 blocks away. She'd called him earlier, bubbling with excitement about showing him her art project. "It's a surprise, Daddy, you're gonna love it." Her voice echoed in his mind, clear as yesterday. But she never made it home. Luke's hands trembled as he opened the original case file. Every word was burned into his memory, but he forced himself to read it again. The witness statements jumped out at him. Mrs. Henderson from the corner store, Mr. Patterson who lived across from the school, and then something caught his eye. Gray sedan, possibly a Toyota, seen idling near the school between 2:45 and 3:15 p.m. Luke's heart began to race. He grabbed his notepad from the traffic stop with Sarah and Clara. There it was in his own handwriting. Gray Toyota Camry, 2018 model. "It can't be," he muttered, spreading out more papers across the table. He found the witness sketch from 5 years ago. The artist's rendering showed a gray sedan with a distinctive scratch along the passenger door. Luke's hand shook as he remembered Sarah's car, It had the same mark, same location. "Think, Luke, think," he urged himself, pulling out his phone to scroll through the photos he'd discreetly taken while following Sarah. There it was, the same distinctive scratch pattern. More memories flooded back. Emily's teacher mentioned a car following the school bus that week. A parent reported a suspicious vehicle taking photos of children at the playground. All gray sedans, all matching the description. Luke stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He began pacing, running his hands through his hair. The guilt of not connecting these dots sooner crashed over him. How many times had he reviewed these files? How had he missed this? "I'm so sorry, Emily," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I should have looked harder. I should have found you." He returned to the table, pulling out a fresh notepad. His detective instincts kicked in as he began listing the connections. Each point strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just grief playing tricks on him anymore. These were real connections, tangible leads that demanded investigation. Luke picked up Emily's photo again, studying her bright eyes and innocent smile. "I won't let you down again, sweetheart," he promised quietly. "Whatever it takes, I'm going to find out the truth. I won't stop until I know for sure." He began methodically organizing the files, his determination growing stronger with each passing minute. This time, he wouldn't let any detail slip through the cracks. This time, he would follow every lead, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. The small bell above Morris Jewelers chimed as Luke pushed open the heavy glass door. The familiar scent of leather and polish brought him back to that day 7 years ago when he'd first commissioned Emily's bracelet. Mr. Morris, now more gray-haired but sporting the same kind smile, looked up from his workbench. "Officer Callahan," the elderly jeweler said warmly, setting aside his tools. "It's been quite some time." Luke approached the counter, his heart pounding. "Mr. Morris, I need your help with something." He pulled out his phone and showed the jeweler a photo he'd taken of Clara wearing the bracelet. "Do you recognize this piece?" Mr. Morris adjusted his glasses, studying the image carefully. His expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. "Well, that's one of my custom pieces, the infinity heart design with the hidden butterfly clasp." He looked up at Luke, confusion crossing his weathered face. "But how?" "You're certain?" Luke pressed, leaning forward. "This is definitely the bracelet you made for Emily?" "Officer Callahan," Mr. Morris said slowly, "I remember every custom piece I make. That design was special. Your idea about the hidden engraving inside the clasp was unique." He paused, frowning. "Though now that you mention it," Luke's breath caught. "What is it?" "Around the same time I made Emily's bracelet, someone else requested a similar piece." Mr. Morris moved to his filing cabinet, pulling out an old leather-bound ledger. "It struck me as odd because the design was so personal, but they insisted on having it exactly the same." Luke's hands gripped the counter edge. "Do you remember who ordered it?" Mr. Morris shook his head as he flipped through yellowed pages. "It was a man, paid in cash, didn't leave a name." He found the entry he was looking for. "Here it is, same design, same engraving placement. Ordered 3 days after yours." Across town, Sarah paced in her kitchen, phone in hand. Clara's art teacher had just called, asking why Clara hadn't attended class for the 2nd week in a row. Sarah's explanation about Clara being under the weather felt hollow, even to her own ears. She moved to the window, checking the street for what felt like the 100th time that day. No sign of Luke's patrol car, but she knew he was out there somewhere, watching, investigating. The weight of her secrets pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Clara sat at the dining room table, working on a drawing. "Mom," she called out, "can I go back to art class soon? I miss Ms. Peterson." Sarah's heart ached at the disappointment in Clara's voice. "Soon, sweetie. I promise." She watched her daughter bend back over her artwork, so innocent and unaware of the growing tension around her. The past few weeks had become an exhausting dance of avoidance. Sarah had changed their grocery shopping to a store in the next town over. She'd rerouted their daily walks, stopped going to their favorite cafe, even considered switching Clara's doctor. Each change felt like another brick in a wall she was building to protect their life together. Back at the jewelry store, Luke thanked Mr. Morris and stepped out into the afternoon sun. His mind raced with the implications of the second bracelet. Someone had deliberately copied Emily's bracelet. Someone who knew about the custom design. Someone who had been watching them even back then. He got into his patrol car and sat there processing this new information. Sarah's recent behavior only reinforced his suspicions. Her sudden changes in routine, pulling Clara from activities, avoiding public places. These weren't the actions of someone with nothing to hide. Luke pulled out his notebook and added this new piece to his growing list of evidence. The second bracelet wasn't just a coincidence. It was another thread in a pattern that was becoming clearer with each passing day. He knew he was getting closer to the truth, and Sarah's increasing paranoia told him she knew it too. Diana Ramos stood in the doorway of Luke's office, watching him pin another note to his increasingly crowded investigation board. The evening light cast long shadows across the room, and the mess of coffee cups and takeout containers told her everything she needed to know about his state of mind. "Luke," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." He didn't turn around, just kept arranging his notes. "If this is about the Thompson case, I'll have the paperwork on your desk tomorrow." "This isn't about Thompson." Diana moved closer, her boots clicking against the linoleum floor. "It's about Sarah and Clara." Luke's shoulders tensed. He finally turned to face her, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "What about them?" "You're crossing lines, Luke. Following them around town, pulling their records without cause, harassing Sarah's family members." Diana perched on the edge of his desk, her voice gentle but firm. "The chief is starting to ask questions." "I'm not harassing anyone," Luke protested, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm following leads." "Leads based on what? A bracelet and a gut feeling?" Diana shook her head. "Luke, I know how much you miss Emily. We all do. But this obsession—" "It's not an obsession." Luke's fist came down hard on his desk, making the coffee cups rattle. "You didn't see Clara's face, Diana. You haven't watched her movements, her mannerisms. Everything about her screams Emily." Diana pulled out a folder from under her arm. "I know you're hurting, which is why I did some digging myself." She opened the folder, spreading out several documents. "Sarah's address history over the past 5 years. Look at this pattern." Luke leaned forward, scanning the papers. Different cities, different states, never staying in one place longer than 8 months. "She's running from something," Diana continued. "Or someone. But Luke, this doesn't automatically connect her to Emily's case. There could be 100 different reasons why she moves around so much. Or it could be because she's hiding something bigger," Luke insisted, pointing to the dates. "Look at this. She moved to Cedar Rapids right after Emily disappeared. Then to Springfield, then Tulsa." "I understand why you're making these connections," Diana said, placing a hand on his arm. "But you're a cop, Luke. You know we need more than circumstantial evidence. If you keep pushing like this without probable cause, you could lose your badge." Luke pulled away from her touch, pacing the small office. "So I'm just supposed to ignore it? Pretend I don't see what's right in front of me?" "No," Diana replied firmly. "You're supposed to do this the right way. If there's really something here, we need to build a proper case. Otherwise, you're not only risking your career, you could compromise any legitimate investigation into Sarah." Luke stopped at his window, staring out at the darkening parking lot. "I can't let this go, Diana. I won't." His voice cracked slightly. "What if it was your daughter?" Diana stood up, gathering the documents. "That's exactly why you shouldn't be anywhere near this case. You're too close, Luke. Your judgment is clouded." "Maybe being too close is exactly what this case needs." Luke turned back to her, his eyes fierce with determination. "Someone needs to care enough to keep digging, to see the connections everyone else missed 5 years ago." "And what happens when you're wrong?" Diana challenged. "What happens to Clara if you tear her life apart for nothing?" Luke's jaw tightened. "I'll take that risk because if I'm right, if there's even a chance I'm right, then somewhere out there, Emily needs me to keep pushing." The evening air was thick with humidity as Luke's unmarked car rolled to a stop across from Eric's modest ranch house. The porch light cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, and through the open windows, raised voices carried clearly into the night. "You had no right," Sarah's voice cracked with anger. "No right to tell him anything about Clara." Luke quietly stepped out of his car, moving closer to hear better. The crickets chirped loudly in the darkness, nearly drowning out Eric's response. "He's a cop, Sarah. What was I supposed to do? Lie?" Eric's deep voice sounded weary. "You can't keep running forever." "I'm not running," Sarah shot back. "I'm protecting her. Do you have any idea what could happen if—" "If what?" Luke called out, stepping into the light of the porch. Both Sarah and Eric whirled around, startled by his appearance. Sarah's face drained of color, while Eric took a protective step toward his sister. "Officer Callahan," Eric nodded stiffly. "This is private property." "I know," Luke said, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But I think it's time we all had an honest conversation about Clara." Sarah's hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself. "You have no right to be here." "Maybe not," Luke agreed. "But I have enough pieces of this puzzle to start asking some serious questions. The constant moving, the vague answers about Clara's adoption, the bracelet." He watched Sarah flinch at the mention of the bracelet. "Why don't you tell me the truth?" The tension in the air was palpable. Eric looked between his sister and Luke, clearly torn between loyalty and conscience. "Sarah," Eric said softly, "maybe it's time." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she sank onto the porch steps. "I found her at a gas station in Cedar Rapids," she whispered, her voice barely audible. 5 years ago. She was hiding behind the dumpster, covered in bruises, terrified of everything and everyone. Luke's heart hammered in his chest. The timing matched perfectly with Emily's disappearance. "She wouldn't tell me her name or where she came from," Sarah continued, wiping her eyes. "All she had was that bracelet. I called the police, but while I was waiting, she begged me not to let them take her back. She said—" Sarah's voice broke. "She said they'd hurt her again." "Who would hurt her?" Luke pressed, trying to keep his voice gentle despite his growing urgency. "Her foster family," Sarah replied. "I know what I did was wrong. I should have gone through proper channels, should have reported it. But you didn't see her that night, Officer Callahan. She was so small, so broken." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "I couldn't let her go back into the system. I couldn't." Eric placed a comforting hand on his sister's shoulder. "Sarah's always wanted children," he explained to Luke. "When she couldn't have any of her own, it broke her heart. Then Clara came along." "So you just took her?" Luke asked, his cop instincts warring with his understanding as a parent. "Without trying to find her real family?" "I did look," Sarah insisted. "I checked missing children reports, asked around the area. But there was nothing. No one was looking for her." She buried her face in her hands. "I told myself that meant she needed me more than anyone else." Luke felt his chest tighten. The story didn't quite add up with what he knew about Emily's disappearance, but Sarah's raw emotion seemed genuine. He could see why she'd done what she'd done, even if it wasn't legal. "The bracelet," he said carefully. "Where exactly did she get it?" The next morning dawned bright and crisp, a perfect day for the park. Luke sat on a bench near the playground, pretending to read a newspaper while watching Sarah and Clara arrive. His heart ached as Clara skipped toward the swings, her movements so familiar they made his throat tight. Sarah noticed him immediately, her shoulders tensing, but she didn't leave. Instead, she settled onto a nearby bench, keeping a watchful eye on Clara while deliberately avoiding Luke's gaze. Clara pumped her legs on the swing, going higher and higher, her laughter carrying across the playground. It was the same laugh Luke remembered from his own backyard, years ago. He folded his newspaper and stood up slowly, walking toward the swings. "That's pretty impressive," he said casually to Clara, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're really good at that." Clara beamed at him, her face flushed with excitement. "I love swings. They make me feel like I'm flying." Sarah watched them carefully but didn't interfere. Luke could see her internal struggle playing across her face. "I used to push my daughter on these same swings," Luke said softly. "She loved them too." Clara dragged her feet in the wood chips to slow down, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "Where is your daughter now?" Luke swallowed hard. "I don't know. I lost her a long time ago." "That's sad," Clara said, her voice full of genuine sympathy. "I got lost once too, but Sarah found me." Luke's heart skipped a beat. He sat down on the empty swing next to her, trying to keep his voice steady. "What happened when you got lost?" Sarah stood up, taking a step forward, but something held her back. Maybe it was the gentle way Luke spoke to Clara, or perhaps she recognized that Clara needed to tell her story. "I don't remember everything," Clara said, kicking at the wood chips beneath her feet. "The foster home wasn't nice. There was a man who came sometimes. He had a scary snake tattoo on his neck." Luke's hands gripped the swing chains so tightly his knuckles turned white. A snake tattoo. The description matched exactly with a witness statement from Emily's case file. A man seen talking to Emily outside her school days before she disappeared. "Can you tell me more about him?" Luke asked gently, fighting to keep his voice calm. Clara's face scrunched up in concentration. He talked funny, like he had a cold, and he always wore a black jacket even when it was hot. She looked down at her hands. "He used to bring candy, but it made me feel sleepy." Sarah was there in an instant, her protective instinct taking over. "Clara, honey, why don't you go try the monkey bars?" But Clara wasn't finished. "One day he took me for ice cream. I don't remember much after that, just being really scared and cold." She touched her bracelet absently. "Then I was at the gas station and Sarah found me." Luke felt like the world was spinning. The pieces were falling into place. The man with the snake tattoo, the drugged candy, Clara's mysterious appearance at the gas station with Emily's bracelet. It was all connected. Sarah placed her hands on Clara's shoulders, her eyes meeting Luke's with a mix of fear and understanding. "I think that's enough for today," she said quietly. Clara hopped off the swing, apparently unbothered by the heavy conversation. "Can I go play on the slide now?" Sarah nodded, and they both watched as Clara ran off toward the playground equipment, her earlier revelations seemingly forgotten in the simple joy of play. Luke sat there, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just heard. After 5 years of dead ends and false leads, Clara's innocent recollections might be the key to unlocking both her past and Emily's disappearance. Back at the police station, Luke's fingers flew across his keyboard, his heart racing as he pulled up old case files. Clara's description of the tattooed man had ignited a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. The snake tattoo detail matched perfectly with witness statements from Emily's disappearance. "Diana," he called out to his colleague, "I need access to the foster care investigation archives from 2018 to 2019. Officer Ramos wheeled her chair over, her expression concerned but supportive. "What are you looking for?" Cross-referencing a suspect, Clara mentioned a man with a snake tattoo who visited her foster home. The description matches our old witness statements. Luke's voice trembled with barely contained excitement. As they dug through the records, a pattern emerged. 3 foster homes had been investigated for suspicious activities during that period. One case file mentioned a frequent visitor matching the description: Victor Reeves, a suspected child trafficker who had slipped through their fingers multiple times. Luke's hands shook as he pulled up Reeves's file. The man's criminal record sprawled across multiple states, but he'd never been caught. The photo showed a tall man with dark hair and, prominently visible on his neck, a snake tattoo curling from his collarbone to his jaw. "This is him," Luke whispered, staring at the image. "This is the connection we've been missing." Across town, Sarah paced in her kitchen, watching Clara draw at the table. Her phone kept buzzing with texts from Eric, warning her about the risks of staying. She knew she should pack up and leave. It's what she'd always done before when things got complicated. But something felt different this time. "Sarah?" Clara looked up from her drawing. "Are we going to move again?" The question hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Clara's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and sadness that made Sarah's heart ache. "I don't want to leave my art class," Clara continued, her voice small. "And I like Officer Luke. He's nice even though he's sad about his daughter." Sarah sat down next to Clara, pulling her into a tight hug. What would you think about staying, even if things get a little scary?
I'm tired of running, Clara whispered. Can we stay? Please?
Back at the station, Luke was on the phone with FBI Special Agent Martinez, his voice urgent as he explained the breakthrough. We have a credible witness who can connect Victor Reeves to both cases. She's a young girl who escaped his trafficking operation, and she's wearing my daughter's bracelet.
Send me everything you have, Martinez replied, his tone serious. I'm assigning a team immediately. We've been building a case against Reeves for years, but we've never had a solid witness before.
Luke gathered the files, his hands steady now with purpose. The witness is currently living with Sarah Bennett, who found her at a gas station. They're both at risk if Reeves discovers their location.
We'll put them under protective custody, Martinez assured him. Don't approach Reeves if you locate him. This needs to be handled at the federal level. As Luke hung up the phone, Diana placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You did it, Luke. You found the connection. Luke nodded, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. After 5 years of searching, Clara's innocent recollections had unlocked the truth he'd been seeking. Now he just had to make sure both Clara and Sarah remained safe while the FBI built their case. The FBI agents arrived on a crisp morning, their black SUVs pulling into the police station parking lot with quiet authority. Special Agent Martinez, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, strode into the station flanked by 2 other agents. Luke stood to greet them, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and worry. Officer Callahan, Martinez extended his hand. Your report about Clara's bracelet and the tattoo description caught our attention immediately. They gathered in the conference room where Luke had laid out all his evidence, photos of Emily's bracelet, Clara's statements, and the files on Victor Reeves. Agent Lisa Chen, a forensics specialist, examined the bracelet photos with careful attention. The engraving matches exactly, she confirmed, comparing the images. This isn't a coincidence. These bracelets were made by the same jeweler, and the second one was ordered within days of Emily's disappearance. Martinez spread out a series of surveillance photos across the table. Victor Reeves has been on our radar for years. We believe he's part of a larger trafficking network, but he's incredibly careful. Never stays in one place too long. Luke's hands clenched as he studied the photos. The snake tattoo on Victor's neck seemed to mock him, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong 5 years ago. He was here, Luke said quietly. Right here in our town when Emily disappeared. We found records of him visiting 3 different foster homes in the area during that time period, Agent Rodriguez, the 3rd FBI agent, explained. All 3 homes were later investigated for suspicious activities, but the evidence was always circumstantial. Sarah and Clara were brought in separately, escorted by Diana Ramos. Clara clutched her sketchbook tightly as she entered the room, her eyes widening at the sight of all the agents. Sarah kept a protective hand on her shoulder. Clara, Martinez said gently, kneeling to her eye level. Officer Callahan tells us you remember some very important things about a man with a special tattoo. Would you be willing to tell us about him? Clara looked up at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. He came to the house sometimes, Clara said softly. The snake on his neck moved when he talked. He would bring presents, but they made the other kids cry. Luke felt his throat tighten at Clara's words. The other agents exchanged meaningful glances as Clara continued to describe her memories of Victor's visits to the foster home. Mrs. Bennett, Martinez turned to Sarah. We understand you found Clara at a gas station. We need every detail about that night. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, looking torn. I was afraid if I reported it, they'd take her away. She was so scared, so hurt. I couldn't. You're not in trouble, Martinez assured her. Your information could help us find other children like Clara. Luke watched as Sarah's resistance crumbled. She described finding Clara hiding behind a dumpster, bruised and terrified, wearing clothes too big for her and clutching the bracelet like a lifeline. Officer Callahan, Martinez said after Sarah finished, given your personal connection to this case and your knowledge of the local area, we want you to work with us as a liaison. But understand, this has to be by the book. No lone wolf investigations. Luke nodded solemnly. I understand, sir.
Whatever it takes to find Emily and stop Victor. The agents began setting up a command center in the station, transforming the quiet small-town police department into a hub of federal investigation. Luke felt the weight of professional scrutiny on his shoulders, but it was nothing compared to the hope building in his chest. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't chasing shadows anymore. Sarah paced in her kitchen, stealing glances through the window at the black SUVs that seemed to appear more frequently on her quiet street. Her hands trembled as she washed the same dish for the third time, her mind racing with worries about what the FBI's presence meant for her and Clara. Clara sat at the kitchen table working on her homework, but her pencil had stopped moving. She watched her mother with concerned eyes. "Mom, are you okay? You keep washing that same plate." Sarah forced a smile, setting down the dish. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about things." "Is it because of Officer Callahan?" Clara asked innocently. "He seems nice. He reminds me of someone, but I can't remember who." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at Clara's words. She turned away, pretending to organize the counter while fighting back tears. The weight of her secrets felt heavier with each passing day. Across town, Luke stood in the doorway of an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. The paint was peeling, and weeds had overtaken the yard. But FBI forensics teams moved methodically through the property, documenting everything they found. "Officer Callahan," Agent Martinez called from inside, "you need to see this." Luke followed Martinez's voice to a small room upstairs. The walls were bare except for one corner where investigators had pulled back loose wallpaper. Behind it, they found dozens of Polaroid photographs taped to the wall. Luke's stomach turned as he examined the photos. Each showed a different child, some looking scared, others seemingly unaware they were being photographed. His hands shook as he searched the faces, both dreading and hoping to find Emily among them. "These appear to be surveillance photos," Martinez explained. "Victor was watching these kids before taking them. We've identified 3 of them as confirmed missing persons cases." Luke stepped closer, studying each face. "Emily's not here," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and frustration. "But these other children—" "We're running facial recognition on all of them," Martinez assured him. "This is the first solid evidence we've found linking Victor to multiple abductions." Back at Sarah's house, Clara had grown quieter throughout the afternoon. She sat on the living room couch, hugging her knees to her chest. "Mom?" she called out softly. "Why do you get scared when police cars drive by?" Sarah stopped folding laundry and looked at her daughter, this precious girl who had become her whole world. The truth had been pressing against her lips for days, and she knew she couldn't keep it hidden any longer. She sat down next to Clara, taking her small hands in her own. "Sweetie, there's something I need to tell you. Something important about how you came to be my daughter." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "Is it about the bad place before you found me?" Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, honey, you see, I didn't adopt you the normal way. I found you when you needed help, and I couldn't bear to let anyone take you away. I was afraid they might send you back to the bad people." "The man with the snake tattoo?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Sarah pulled Clara into a tight hug. "Yes, sweetheart, I promised myself I would protect you from him and anyone like him. That's why we moved so many times. But now Officer Callahan and the FBI, they're trying to catch the bad people. They want to make sure they can't hurt any other children." Clara buried her face in her mother's shoulder, and Sarah could feel her tears soaking through her shirt. "Are they going to take me away from you?" "I don't know, baby," Sarah answered honestly, her voice breaking. "But I promise I will do everything I can to keep us together. You're my daughter no matter what happens." Clara sat on her bed, clutching the bracelet that had become the center of so much confusion. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she traced the delicate pattern with her finger, wondering about all the secrets it might hold. The morning sun filtered through her window, but it did nothing to warm the chill she felt inside. Sarah knocked softly on the doorframe. "Breakfast is ready, sweetheart." "I'm not hungry," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't look at Sarah, the woman she'd always called Mom, but who had kept so much from her. "Clara, please, we need to talk about this. Why didn't you tell me before?" Clara's voice cracked. "All those times I asked about where I came from, you just made up stories." Sarah stepped into the room, her eyes red from crying. I was trying to protect you. I thought if I told you the truth, it would bring back all the bad memories. But they're my memories, Clara burst out, surprising herself with the force of her words. Even the scary ones belong to me. Down at the police station, Luke sat at his desk reviewing the latest FBI reports when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. Clara wants to talk to you. An hour later, Luke found himself sitting across from Clara in the police station's family room. The space was designed to be comfortable for children, with soft chairs and colorful walls, but Clara sat rigidly, her hands folded in her lap. Officer Callahan, she began hesitantly, did you know my real parents? Luke's heart ached at the question. No, Clara, I don't. But I'm trying to figure out what happened to you, and maybe that will help us find them. Sarah. She said you're looking for bad people, like the man with the snake tattoo. Before Luke could respond, Agent Martinez knocked on the door. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got something. He handed Luke a file. We found a partial print on the back of one of those photos. It matches a guy named Tommy Reynolds, currently serving time in state prison for drug trafficking. He was known to work with Victor's crew. Luke studied the file while Clara watched him intently. Clara, he said gently, would you be willing to help us? Sometimes even small memories can be really important clues. Clara nodded slowly. I remember things sometimes, like in dreams. But they're all mixed up. That's okay, Luke assured her. We can take it slow. Maybe we could start with the day Sarah found you. Do you remember anything about that? Clara's forehead wrinkled in concentration. It was raining. I was scared and hungry. The gas station had a big red sign and... She paused, her eyes growing distant. There was music playing. The same song kept playing over and over. Luke quickly wrote down these details. That's great, Clara. Every detail helps. Do you remember anything about where you were before the gas station? There was a house with green shutters, Clara said slowly, and a swing set that creaked. The man with the tattoo would come at night sometimes. He always brought candy, but... She shuddered, unable to continue. Sarah, who had been watching silently from the corner, moved to comfort Clara, but the girl flinched away from her touch. The rejection was subtle but clear, and Sarah's face crumpled with pain. I think that's enough for today, Luke said softly, noticing Clara's distress. You've been very brave, Clara. These memories will help us a lot. Agent Martinez nodded in agreement. We'll run down the lead on Tommy Reynolds right away. Maybe he can tell us more about Victor's operation. Tommy Reynolds sat across from Luke and Agent Martinez in the prison's interview room, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the gray walls. His eyes darted nervously between them as he fidgeted with his handcuffs. Look, I ain't saying nothing about Victor, Tommy muttered, but his voice wavered. Man's got eyes everywhere. Agent Martinez leaned forward. We can protect you, Tommy, but you need to help us first. We know you worked with him. Luke placed a photo on the metal table. It showed Emily on her 5th birthday, her smile bright and innocent. This little girl disappeared 5 years ago. Victor took her, didn't he? Tommy's face paled as he stared at the photo. He ran a shaky hand through his thinning hair. Yeah, I remember her. Victor. He's got a system. Small towns, quiet places where nobody asks questions. He moves the kids around, never stays in one spot too long. Where is he now? Luke's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. Tommy glanced at the door before lowering his voice. He's still working the same circuit. Changes his name every few months, but he's got a pattern. Uses truck stops mainly. They're anonymous, lots of people coming and going. The girl in the photo, Agent Martinez pressed. What happened to her? There was a girl matching her description, Tommy said slowly. Victor kept her longer than the others, said she was special, valuable. Last I heard, she was still in the network somewhere. Luke's hands clenched into fists under the table. Agent Martinez noticed and subtly took over the questioning. We need specifics, Tommy. Which truck stops? Tommy described several locations, but one caught their attention, a stop just 30 miles outside town. He uses the name Mike Peterson there, always wears long sleeves to cover the tattoo. Back at the station, the FBI team quickly mobilized. Surveillance teams were dispatched to the truck stop, setting up in unmarked vehicles and nearby buildings. Luke watched the live feed from their command center, his eyes scanning every face for Victor. Meanwhile, Sarah paced in her living room, jumping at every sound. Clara sat on the couch, drawing in her sketchbook, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. "Mom?" Clara looked up from her drawing. "Are you okay?" Sarah forced a smile. "Of course, sweetie. I just think we should stay home today." "But I have art class," Clara protested. "Not today," Sarah said firmly. "We'll do something fun here instead." The doorbell rang, making them both jump. Sarah peered through the peephole to find Luke standing there. She quickly let him in. "Any news?" she asked in a whisper. Luke nodded grimly. "We may have located Victor. I wanted to warn you. He might know we're closing in. You need to be extra careful." Clara looked up at the mention of Victor's name, her pencil frozen mid-stroke. "I'm not letting her out of my sight," Sarah declared, moving closer to Clara. "Should we leave town?" "No," Luke said. "The FBI has agents watching your house. You're safer here where we can protect you. But stay inside and keep the doors locked." Clara set down her sketchbook. Is he looking for me?" Luke knelt beside her. "Don't worry about that. We're not going to let anything happen to you. You're safe now." Sarah wrapped her arms around Clara, and this time the girl didn't pull away. They watched as Luke returned to his car, where Agent Martinez was waiting with updates from the surveillance team. The afternoon sun beat down on the truck stop as Luke sat in an unmarked car with Agent Martinez. His hands were sweaty on the steering wheel as they watched the steady stream of vehicles coming and going. 4 other FBI vehicles were strategically positioned around the perimeter, waiting. "Target spotted," crackled a voice through their radios. "Gray pickup turning in from the highway. Matches the description." Luke's heart pounded as he watched the dusty pickup pull into a parking spot near the diner. A tall man in a long-sleeved black shirt stepped out despite the heat. Even from this distance, Luke could see the man carried himself with a predator's confidence. "That's gotta be him," Luke whispered. "The way he's dressed, how he moves." Agent Martinez nodded. "Teams, hold position. Let's see where he goes." They watched as Victor walked into the diner, choosing a booth with a clear view of both exits. Classic criminal behavior, always watching the escape routes. "He's ordering coffee," reported an agent inside, posing as a trucker. "Keeps checking his phone and looking around." Minutes crawled by like hours. Luke's fingers drummed against his leg as they waited for the perfect moment. They couldn't risk a scene that might endanger other customers. Suddenly, Victor's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed as he studied a reflection in the diner's window. "He's made us," Agent Martinez said urgently into his radio. "All units, prepare to move." Victor bolted from his seat, shoving past a waitress. Instead of heading for the exits, he darted through the kitchen, sending pots and pans clattering. "Around back!" Luke shouted, already running. His feet pounded against the asphalt as he circled the building. Victor burst through the rear door, nearly colliding with Luke. For a split second, their eyes met. Luke saw nothing but cold calculation in the man's gaze. Victor spun and sprinted toward a line of parked semis. Luke pursued, his lungs burning. FBI agents converged from all directions. "Federal agents," someone shouted. "Stop or we'll shoot." Victor dove between 2 trucks, but Agent Martinez was there waiting. She tackled him hard to the ground. Victor thrashed and fought as other agents rushed in to help restrain him. Luke stood back, his chest heaving as they cuffed the struggling man. 5 years of searching and finally... "You're too late," Victor spat, blood trickling from his split lip. "The girl with the bracelet. She was just the beginning. You'll never find them all." Luke grabbed Victor's shirt, pulling him up. "What do you know about that bracelet? Where's Emily?" "Luke!" Agent Martinez pulled him back. "We do this by the book." Victor laughed, a chilling sound that made Luke's skin crawl. "Such a pretty bracelet," he taunted. Custom made, wasn't it? With that special engraving inside? Luke felt the blood drain from his face. Only someone who had seen Emily's bracelet up close would know about that detail. As the agents led Victor to a waiting vehicle, Luke stood rooted to the spot. Victor's words confirmed what he'd suspected all along. There was a connection between Emily and Clara. But what exactly was it? And how many other children had fallen victim to this monster's schemes? Agent Martinez touched his shoulder. We'll get the truth out of him, Luke. This is just the beginning. Luke watched as they loaded Victor into the car, his mind racing with questions. The bracelet was the key. But to what? Luke watched through the two-way mirror as Victor sat handcuffed to the metal table in the FBI interrogation room. The man's posture was relaxed, almost bored, as if this were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Agent Martinez led the questioning, her voice steady and professional. Let's start with Emily Callahan. Where is she? Victor's lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. Emily who? You'll have to be more specific. I've dealt with hundreds of kids over the years. He glanced toward the mirror, knowing Luke was there. They all start to blur together after a while. Luke's fists clenched at his sides. Agent Thompson placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. He's trying to get under your skin, Thompson whispered. Don't let him. Martinez spread photographs across the table. Emily's school picture, the day she disappeared, and a recent photo of Clara wearing the bracelet. Ah yes, the famous bracelet, Victor drawled. Such a unique piece. Custom made, wasn't it? With that special message inside? He leaned back, chains rattling. But which little girl are we talking about? The one you lost, Officer Callahan? Or the one you found? Luke stepped forward, ready to burst into the room, but Thompson held him back. Martinez pressed on. Tell us about the foster home where Clara was staying, the one you visited regularly. For the first time, Victor's smug expression flickered. I never said anything about visiting foster homes. But you just did, Martinez pounced on his slip. In fact, you were there multiple times during the period Clara lived there. We have witnesses. Victor's jaw tightened. He tried to cover his mistake with a laugh, but the damage was done. That dump? Yeah, I stopped by sometimes. Easy pickings when the system's already failed them. Luke's mind raced. The foster home had been a front for Victor's operation. But there had to be records somewhere. No criminal enterprise this large could operate without documentation. Where did you keep your records, Victor? Martinez asked, as if reading Luke's thoughts. A man like you, dealing with hundreds of kids, you must have needed to keep track somehow. Victor's eyes narrowed. You think I'm stupid enough to write everything down? But Luke noticed the slight tension in Victor's shoulders, the way his fingers twitched against the table. He was lying. Luke knocked on the glass, signaling Martinez. She stepped out to join him and Thompson in the observation room. He's hiding something, Luke said. The way he reacted, there are records somewhere. Thompson nodded. We found some old receipts in his truck for a storage facility outside town. Could be worth checking out. A warehouse, Luke said, remembering something from the case files. 5 years ago, there were reports of suspicious activity at an abandoned warehouse in that area. We never found anything, but Victor wasn't on our radar then, Martinez finished. Good catch, Luke. I'll get a team together. They looked back through the window at Victor, who was staring at his reflection with that same cold smile. He's not going to tell us anything else, Luke said, but if there's a ledger out there with records of his operation, it could give us everything we need, Thompson agreed. Names, dates, locations, maybe even where he sent the kids. Martinez was already on her phone, coordinating with other agents. We'll need a search warrant for the warehouse. Luke, you're coming with us. You know the area better than anyone. Luke nodded, his heart racing with renewed hope. If Victor had kept records, they might finally uncover the truth about Emily, Clara, and all the other children who had disappeared over the years. The warehouse loomed before them in the fading afternoon light, its rusted metal walls telling stories of abandonment and decay. Luke stood with the FBI tactical team, his heart pounding as Agent Martinez gave final instructions. Remember, we're looking for documents, photographs, anything that could expose Victor's operation, she said. her voice low and focused. The team moved in silently, flashlight beams cutting through the dusty air. Luke's police training kicked in as he swept his section, noting old tire tracks and drag marks on the concrete floor. The warehouse was massive, filled with abandoned shipping containers and rotting wooden crates. "Over here!" Thompson called out, his voice echoing. The team converged on a section where the floor showed signs of recent activity. Scuff marks led to a container that seemed different from the others. Luke's hands trembled slightly as he helped pry open the container's doors. Inside, metal shelving units lined the walls, filled with boxes and filing cabinets. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and mildew. "This is it," Martinez whispered. "Spread out, check everything." Luke pulled on latex gloves and began sorting through files. Hours passed as they methodically documented every piece of evidence. His back ached, but he couldn't stop. Not when they were this close. "Callahan," Thompson's voice cut through the silence. He stood near the back of the container, examining a section of wall paneling that looked slightly off color. Luke joined him, running his fingers along the edge until he felt a slight give. Together they pried the panel loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a thick leather-bound book and several manila envelopes stuffed with photographs. Luke's breath caught as he carefully removed them. Under the harsh portable lights they'd set up, he spread the photos across a makeshift work table. Dozens of children's faces stared back at him, some smiling school photos, others clearly taken against their will. "Clara," Luke whispered, picking up one particular photo. She looked younger, maybe 7 or 8, wearing the bracelet that had started this whole investigation. Her eyes held a haunted look that made his stomach turn. Martinez appeared at his shoulder with the ledger. "Look at this," she said, opening it to reveal pages of meticulous notes written in some kind of code. Each entry has a number, followed by dates and locations. Luke leaned in closer. One entry caught his eye, a series of numbers that matched the engraving inside Clara's bracelet. Next to it were the words, "Package relocated, special order." He was tracking them like inventory, Thompson said, disgust evident in his voice. They continued through the ledger, finding more coded entries. Some children were marked as delivered, others as in transit or relocated. The clinical nature of it made Luke's skin crawl. "There's no mention of Emily," Luke said, flipping through the pages again. "No matching dates or numbers." "But this proves Clara was part of his operation," Martinez noted, bagging the ledger as evidence. "These records could help us track down other victims, maybe lead us to where the children were sent." Luke stared at Clara's photo again, his mind racing. The bracelet number in the ledger confirmed what he'd suspected. Clara's appearance in their small town wasn't random. She was connected to Victor's trafficking ring, but how? And why wasn't Emily listed in the ledger? The FBI evidence team continued their methodical search, documenting every photograph and file. Each flash of their cameras illuminated another piece of Victor's dark operation. But for Luke, the most important pieces of the puzzle were still missing. In the FBI's makeshift command center, agents huddled around a large table covered with photocopies of Victor's ledger. The air was thick with concentration as they worked to break the complex coding system. "Look at this pattern," Agent Martinez said, pointing to a series of numbers. "These digits here match known foster care facilities in 3 different states." Luke leaned over the documents, his tired eyes scanning the entries. After hours of cross-referencing, a pattern emerged from the seemingly random numbers and symbols. "The first set of numbers represents dates," he explained, drawing connections on a whiteboard. "The second set matches addresses, and these symbols—" He paused, circling several recurring marks. "They're status indicators." Thompson, another FBI agent, pulled up records on his laptop. "We've matched 15 locations so far, all small towns with understaffed foster care systems. Victor was targeting places where kids could slip through the cracks." Luke's attention caught on an entry marked with a distinct red symbol, a small cross inside a circle. Next to it was the same number sequence engraved in Clara's bracelet. "This one's different," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "The red marking appears only twice in the entire ledger." Martinez pulled up additional files. The address leads to a residence in Millbrook, 40 minutes from here. Property records show it belongs to Agnes Winters. Agnes Winters? Thompson typed rapidly. She was questioned 5 years ago in connection with a trafficking case, but there wasn't enough evidence to hold her. Across town, Clara sat at her kitchen table, pushing food around her plate while Sarah tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. "Your art teacher asked about you today," Sarah said gently. "She misses having you in class." Clara nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. Earlier that day, she'd overheard Sarah on the phone, talking in hushed tones about the FBI investigation. The words Victor and foster homes had made her stomach twist with fear. "Mom," Clara said quietly, setting down her fork. "What if the bad people come back?" Sarah's heart clenched at the fear in Clara's voice. She moved to kneel beside her daughter's chair. "Nobody is going to hurt you, sweetheart. Officer Callahan and the FBI are making sure of that." Clara twisted the bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit she'd developed. "But I remember things sometimes, scary things, about the man with the tattoo and the lady with the red hair." Sarah froze. "Lady with red hair?" "She used to visit the foster home sometimes," Clara continued, her voice barely a whisper. "She had a necklace with a circle and a cross inside it." Back at the command center, Luke stared at a photograph of Agnes Winters, a woman with striking red hair. In the image, she wore a distinctive pendant, a cross inside a circle. "The symbol in the ledger," Luke said, his voice urgent. "It's not just a status marker, it's her signature." Martinez immediately began mobilizing a team. "We need to move on this address now. If Agnes Winters was working with Victor, she might know what happened to the other children," Luke finished, his heart racing with the possibility of finally uncovering the truth about Emily. The pieces were falling into place, each revelation bringing them closer to understanding the full scope of Victor's operation. But for Clara, sitting in her kitchen miles away, the past she'd tried so hard to forget was slowly creeping back, bringing with it memories she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Agnes Winters' house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street, its well-maintained exterior masking the dark secrets within. Luke's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his bulletproof vest, watching FBI agents take position around the property. "Remember," Agent Martinez whispered, "we need her cooperation. Let's try to keep this civil." Luke nodded, his throat tight. After all these years of searching, another piece of the puzzle was within reach. The team approached the front door, and Martinez knocked firmly. "Agnes Winters, FBI, we have a warrant." Through the door's decorative window, they saw movement. A woman with faded red hair appeared, her face pale with shock. She opened the door slowly, her hands visibly shaking. "I don't know what this is about," Agnes said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "But I haven't done anything wrong." Luke studied her carefully, noting how her eyes darted between the agents. She wore the same necklace from the photograph, the cross inside a circle catching the afternoon light. The agents entered the house and Martinez guided Agnes to her living room. Family photos lined the walls, showing a carefully crafted image of normalcy that made Luke's stomach turn. "We know about Victor," Luke said, his voice hard. "We found your symbol in his ledger." Agnes's face remained blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." Martinez placed photographs from the ledger on the coffee table. "Your signature appears next to entries about children who passed through here, children like Clara." At Clara's name, Agnes's composure cracked slightly. Her hand went to her necklace, clutching it like a lifeline. "You can't prove anything," she whispered, but her resistance was weakening. "We already have Victor in custody," Luke pressed, leaning forward. "He confirmed your involvement. The only question now is how much you're willing to tell us." Agnes's shoulders sagged, the weight of her secrets finally becoming too heavy to bear. "I never hurt them," she said, her voice breaking. I just provided a place for them to stay temporarily." "Tell us about Clara," Luke demanded, pushing a photo of the young girl across the table. Agnes stared at the photograph, tears welling in her eyes. She was different from the others, stronger-willed. She wouldn't stop asking questions, wouldn't stop fighting back. Victor said she was too much trouble. Luke's heart ached thinking of Clara's resistance, her refusal to be broken. What happened to her? Victor abandoned her at a gas station, said it wasn't worth the risk keeping her. Agnes wiped her eyes. But there was another girl around the same time. Similar age, similar look. Luke's breath caught in his throat. Emily? Agnes nodded slowly. Victor was particularly careful with her. Said she was special, a high-value package. He moved her to a different location, one he reserved for his most important captives. Where? Luke's voice was barely a whisper. There's an old hunting lodge about 3 hours north. Victor called it the Summit. That's where he kept the ones he thought would bring the highest prices. Agnes's voice trembled. I remember the girl you're looking for. She wore a bracelet like Clara's. Martinez immediately radioed for backup while other agents began documenting Agnes's confession. Luke sat back, his mind racing with this new information. After 5 years of dead ends and false leads, he finally had a solid direction, a real chance at finding Emily. The Summit, he repeated quietly, committing the name to memory. It wasn't just a lead anymore. It was hope, tangible and real, that his daughter might still be alive. The convoy of FBI vehicles sped north along winding mountain roads, their lights flashing through the dense forest. Luke sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his heart pounding with each mile that brought them closer to the summit. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees as they approached the secluded hunting lodge. "Teams in position," crackled the radio. Agent Martinez gave the signal, and heavily armed FBI agents emerged from their vehicles, moving swiftly toward the weathered wooden structure. Luke's trained eye noticed fresh tire tracks in the muddy driveway. "Someone left in a hurry," he muttered, pointing them out to Martinez. The agents breached the building, room by room, calling, "Clear." Their voices echoed through the empty spaces. The air inside was stale but carried traces of recent human presence. In the kitchen, half-eaten food sat on plates, some items still warm to the touch. "They can't have been gone more than an hour," an agent called out, examining a still-running coffee maker. Luke's police instincts kicked in as he surveyed the main room. Chairs were knocked over, drawers left open, signs of a hasty departure. His heart sank at missing them by such a narrow margin, but hope flickered when he spotted a heavy padlock on a door leading to what appeared to be an office. "We need bolt cutters here," Martinez called out. Within moments, the lock clattered to the floor, and Luke pushed the door open with trembling hands. The room beyond made his breath catch. Filing cabinets lined one wall while the other displayed a corkboard covered in photographs and notes. But it was the desk that drew Luke's attention. Scattered across its surface were composition notebooks, drawings, and personal items, memories stolen from countless children. Luke began sifting through the papers with latex-gloved hands, his police training warring with his paternal instincts. Each item told a story of loss and suffering, making his chest tighten with grief and anger. Then he saw it, a folded piece of paper decorated with careful crayon strokes. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing a drawing of a silver bracelet with tiny hearts. The careful cursive beneath it was unmistakable, the same handwriting he'd seen on countless birthday cards and school assignments. "This is Emily's," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The way she draws her ease, the little hearts she adds to her eyes. This is her handwriting." Martinez leaned in to examine the drawing. When was this made? Luke pointed to the corner of the paper where a date was written in different handwriting. 3 days ago. His voice cracked. "She was here, Martinez. My baby was right here, 3 days ago." The FBI's forensics team carefully documented and collected everything in the room while Luke stood by, watching them bag his daughter's drawing as evidence. Fresh footprints in the dust, warm coffee in the pot, Emily's recent drawing. They had just missed them. "We'll find her, Luke," Martinez assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're closer than we've ever been. Victor's network is crumbling, and now we have proof Emily's alive." Luke nodded, his jaw set with determination. 5 years of searching had led to this moment. The drawing was more than evidence. It was a message from Emily, proof that his daughter's spirit remained unbroken. She was out there waiting to be found, and Luke would not rest until he brought her home. Clara sat at the kitchen table, pretending to focus on her math homework while straining to hear the hushed conversation between Sarah and Luke in the living room. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows as they discussed the latest developments in the investigation. "We're running out of leads," Luke's voice carried through the half-open door. "Victor's not talking, and we need something more concrete." Clara's pencil stopped moving across her paper. Her heart began to race as fragments of memories surfaced, memories she'd tried so hard to forget. I think I can help," Clara called out, pushing back her chair and walking into the living room. Sarah and Luke turned to her, surprised. Sarah immediately moved to protect her daughter. "Clara, honey, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Clara interrupted, her voice small but determined. She twisted the bracelet on her wrist nervously. "I remember something about Victor. Something important." Luke knelt down to Clara's eye level, his expression gentle. "What do you remember, Clara?" Clara's eyes grew distant as she recalled the memory. "Victor used to talk on the phone a lot, late at night when he thought we were sleeping. He would argue with someone about money." She paused, gathering her courage. "There was this one person he called the special client. He said this person paid extra for certain kids, the ones he thought were special." Sarah's face paled and she reached for Clara's hand. "Baby, you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to." But Clara continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "Victor was always really careful when he talked to this person. He would say things like, 'The merchandise is worth the premium,' and offshore arrangements as usual." She looked up at Luke, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Is this helpful?" Luke quickly pulled out his phone and dialed the FBI task force. "Martinez, we need to cross-reference Victor's ledger with any offshore accounts." Clara just remembered something crucial. Within hours, FBI financial analysts had identified a pattern of large deposits from an anonymous offshore account into Victor's shell companies. The transactions aligned perfectly with dates in the ledger when children had been relocated. "The account traces back to a holding company," Agent Martinez explained as she spread documents across Luke's desk. "It owns several properties, but one stands out. A private estate in Seaview Point, completely isolated on the coast. High security, minimal staff turnover, and regular supply deliveries." Luke studied the satellite photos of the coastal property, his heart racing. This has to be it, the perfect place to hide victims long-term. Back at Sarah's house, Clara sat curled up on the couch, her small frame seeming even tinier as she processed the weight of her revelation. Sarah held her close, stroking her hair. Luke knelt before them both. "Clara, what you remembered. It might help us save Emily and other children too. You're incredibly brave." Clara's eyes met Luke's, filled with a mix of hope and worry. "Will you find them?" "We will," Luke promised, his voice firm and reassuring. "Thanks to you, we know where to look now. We're going to bring them all home." Sarah pulled Clara closer, kissing the top of her head. "You did good, sweetheart. You did so good." The FBI was already mobilizing, planning their approach to the coastal property. Luke stood, ready to join the task force, but paused to look back at Clara and Sarah. In Clara's eyes, he saw the same strength he remembered in Emily's, a resilience that even Victor couldn't break. The coastal wind whipped around Luke and the FBI tactical team as they approached the sprawling estate under the cover of pre-dawn darkness. His heart hammered against his bulletproof vest, knowing that after 5 long years, Emily might be just behind those walls. "Alpha Team, take the east entrance. Bravo Team, west wing. Remember, there are children inside. Exercise extreme caution." Agent Martinez's voice crackled through their earpieces. Luke moved with his team, years of police training kicking in despite his churning emotions. As they breached the main entrance, shouts and gunfire erupted from the second floor. 2 of Victor's men had spotted them and opened fire. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," an FBI agent bellowed as the team took cover. Luke's training kept him focused as they cleared room after room. The mansion was a maze of locked doors and empty bedrooms. Each empty room made his heart sink a little more until they reached the kitchen. There they encountered 3 more of Victor's associates attempting to destroy evidence. A fierce firefight broke out, but the FBI team quickly subdued them. Luke noticed a heavy steel door behind the pantry, poorly concealed and secured with multiple locks. "I need bolt cutters here," Luke called out, his voice cracking with urgency. An agent quickly supplied them, and Luke's hands shook as he cut through the locks one by one. The basement door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Luke switched on his tactical light, leading the way down with his weapon drawn. The beam cut through the musty air, illuminating bare concrete walls. At the bottom, another locked door blocked their path. Without hesitation, Luke kicked it open, the sound echoing through the underground space. His flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing several small figures huddled in corners. Children of various ages blinked in the sudden light, some covering their eyes, others shrinking back in fear. Then he saw her. In the farthest corner, a girl with familiar brown hair raised her head. Even after 5 years, Luke would know those eyes anywhere. Emily, his Emily, stared back at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "Daddy?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. Luke's weapon clattered to the floor as he rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. "Emily, oh God, Emily." His hands trembled as he reached for her, afraid she might disappear like so many dreams before. But she was real. Emily fell into his arms, her thin frame shaking with sobs. Luke held her tightly, his own tears flowing freely as he stroked her tangled hair. "I'm here, baby. Daddy's here. I found you. I finally found you." Above them, FBI agents secured the rest of the building, calling for medical teams and child services. The sounds of arrests and tactical operations continued, but in that basement room, time stood still as father and daughter clung to each other. "I knew you'd come," Emily whispered into his chest. "I never stopped believing you'd find me." Luke pulled back just enough to look at her face, memorizing every detail. She was older, thinner, with shadows in her eyes that no child should have, but she was alive. His little girl was alive. "I never stopped looking," he choked out. "Not for one single day." Medical teams arrived, gently examining each child. Emily refused to let go of Luke's hand as the paramedics checked her over. Her grip tightened when they tried to separate them for transport. "It's okay," Luke assured her, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere. Never again." The fluorescent lights of County General Hospital cast a harsh glow over Emily's pale face as doctors performed their examination. Luke sat beside her bed, his large hand engulfing her smaller one, watching every movement the medical staff made with protective intensity. Emily flinched at each touch, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Luke whispered, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Emily's only response was a slight squeeze of his fingers. The doctor's preliminary findings painted a grim picture. Emily was severely malnourished, with various healing bruises and old scars telling the story of her captivity. Luke's jaw clenched as he listened to the medical report, fighting back tears of rage and guilt. "Mr. Callahan." A nurse poked her head into the room. "There's a young girl named Clara here. She's quite insistent about seeing Emily." Luke glanced at Emily, who had tensed at the mention of a visitor. "It's okay if you don't want to see anyone right now," he assured her. To his surprise, Emily gave a small nod. Is she the girl with the bracelet?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, that's her. She helped us find you." Clara entered the room cautiously, her bright eyes taking in the scene. She wore a cheerful yellow sweater that seemed to bring warmth to the sterile hospital room. The matching bracelets on Emily and Clara's wrists caught the fluorescent light. "Hi, Emily," Clara said softly, approaching the bed with careful steps. "I'm Clara. I really like your bracelet." She held up her own wrist, showing the identical piece of jewelry. Emily stared at Clara's bracelet, then at her own. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Daddy gave me mine," she murmured. "I know," Clara replied, pulling up a chair on the opposite side of the bed from Luke. "Your dad's really brave. He never gave up looking for you." Emily's eyes welled with tears, but Clara continued talking, her voice gentle and encouraging. "Do you like to draw? I love drawing. Maybe we could draw together sometime?" A ghost of a smile touched Emily's lips, the first Luke had seen since finding her. I used to draw a lot." In the hallway outside, Luke could see FBI agents escorting a handcuffed Victor toward the elevator, likely heading to federal holding. The sight of the trafficker made Luke's blood boil, but Emily's small voice drew his attention back to the room. "Clara?" Emily asked hesitantly. Will you stay for a while?" Clara beamed, carefully settling into her chair. "Of course, I can tell you about the art class I go to. Maybe you'd like to come sometime?" As Clara chatted softly about her favorite colors and drawing techniques, Luke noticed Emily's shoulders gradually relaxing. Though she barely spoke, her eyes remained fixed on Clara, as if drawing strength from the other girl's cheerful presence. Agent Martinez stepped into the room, nodding respectfully at Luke. "Officer Callahan, your dedication to this case was instrumental in bringing down Victor's entire operation. We've already found evidence linking him to dozens of trafficking cases across 3 states." Luke barely registered the praise, his attention fixed on Emily as she listened to Clara describe a recent art project. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But all that matters is that she's home." The agent understood, placing a supportive hand on Luke's shoulder before quietly leaving the room. As Luke watched his daughter begin to emerge from her shell, guided by Clara's gentle friendship, he felt the weight of 5 years of searching finally start to lift from his shoulders. The first night in Luke's house was the hardest. Emily stood in her bedroom doorway, frozen, staring at the pink walls and stuffed animals that hadn't moved since she disappeared. Luke had kept everything exactly as she'd left it. "You can sleep in the guest room if you'd prefer," Luke offered gently, noticing her distress. Emily nodded, clutching the small backpack of new clothes they'd bought on the way home. That night, her screams pierced the darkness. Luke rushed to her side, finding her tangled in sheets, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now," he whispered, keeping his distance until she fully awakened. The next morning, Clara arrived with a stack of drawings and her favorite colored pencils. "I thought maybe we could draw together," she suggested, setting up at the kitchen table. Emily hesitated, but eventually sat down beside her. "This one's for you," Clara said, sliding over a bright drawing of 2 girls wearing matching bracelets. Emily traced the paper with trembling fingers. Sarah watched from the doorway as Clara chatted about normal things, her favorite cartoons, the squirrels in her backyard, the funny hat her art teacher wore. With each visit, Emily's responses grew longer, her posture more relaxed. "She's good for Emily," Sarah told Luke quietly. "Clara has a way of making everything feel safer." The family therapist, Dr. Martinez, suggested meeting twice a week. In her warm office filled with soft cushions and fidget toys, Emily initially stayed close to Luke, speaking only in whispers. "Can you tell me about your bracelet?" Dr. Martinez asked during one session. Emily glanced at Clara, who gave her an encouraging smile. "Daddy gave it to me for my birthday," Emily said softly. When they took me, I thought if I kept it safe, he'd find me someday." Her voice broke, and Luke fought back tears. "And he did find you," Clara added firmly, "because he never stopped looking." During these sessions, Emily gradually began sharing fragments of her ordeal, the dark rooms, the constant moving, the fear. Luke learned to manage his anger at what had been done to his daughter, focusing instead on helping her heal. Clara's presence became a constant source of comfort. She brought normalcy to their lives, treating Emily not as a victim, but as a friend. When Emily had panic attacks at sudden noises, Clara would sit with her drawing pictures until the fear subsided. "You're doing really well," Dr. Martinez told them during a session. "Healing takes time, but you're not alone in this journey." Emily looked around the room, at her father who never gave up, at Clara who showed her how to smile again, at Sarah, who understood the importance of patience and love. For the first time since coming home, she felt a small spark of hope. The autumn leaves danced outside the window as Emily sat at her desk, absently sketching in the notebook Clara had given her. 6 months had passed since her rescue, and small changes marked her progress. A laugh here, a smile there, moments when the shadows in her eyes lifted. Luke watched from the doorway, his heart swelling at these glimpses of his daughter emerging from her shell. "Hey kiddo," he said softly. "Ready to talk about school?" Emily's pencil stopped moving. "I don't know, Dad," she whispered. "What if everyone stares? What if they ask questions?" Before Luke could respond, the doorbell rang. Clara burst in with her usual energy, carrying a container of Sarah's homemade cookies. "Emily, look what Mom and I made." The kitchen filled with warmth as Sarah prepared dinner, the aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filling the house. Clara helped set the table, chattering about her day at school while Emily listened intently. During dinner, Clara noticed Emily pushing food around her plate. "You know," Clara said between bites, "when I first started at my new school, I was super scared too." Emily looked up, surprised. "You were?" "Yeah, after Mom rescued me from, I thought everyone would know somehow, that they'd see right through me." Clara's voice grew softer. "But they didn't. They just saw me." Sarah reached over and squeezed Clara's hand, while Luke watched the interaction with growing amazement. "How did you do it?" Emily asked, leaning forward. "I pretended to be brave at first," Clara admitted. "And then one day I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. Plus," she added with a grin, "having a best friend helps." Emily's eyes welled with tears, but for the first time, they weren't tears of fear. Would you help me? When I go back?" "Every step of the way," Clara promised. Luke exchanged glances with Sarah across the table. Something had shifted in the room, a piece of Emily's wall crumbling away, replaced by trust. He watched as the girls continued talking, Clara sharing stories about her favorite teachers and the quiet spots in the library where she went when things got overwhelming. The evening stretched on, and Luke found himself studying Clara's effect on Emily. His daughter was sitting straighter, asking questions, even laughing at Clara's dramatic retelling of a cafeteria mishap. The change was remarkable. Later, as Sarah and Clara prepared to leave, Luke pulled Sarah aside. "They're good for each other," he said quietly, watching the girls hugging goodbye. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "They heal each other," she replied. "Clara's been different too, stronger, more settled. Having Emily in her life, it's like finding a missing piece." Luke felt something stir in his heart, a possibility he hadn't considered before. He watched Clara gently encouraging Emily, sharing her strength so naturally, and wondered if there might be a way to make this connection permanent. Clara sat at Luke's kitchen table one evening, fidgeting with her bracelet. "Can you tell me about Victor?" she asked quietly. "About what really happened to me?" Luke's heart tightened, but he knew this moment had to come. He glanced at Sarah, who nodded gently. "Victor was running a trafficking operation," Luke explained carefully, using simple words. "He would take children from foster homes and—" He paused, choosing his words. "He would sell them to bad people." Clara's eyes widened. "Is that what almost happened to me?" "Yes," Sarah cut in, her voice trembling. "I was working at that gas station when I found you. You were so small, so scared." Tears welled in her eyes. "You were hiding behind the dumpster, covered in bruises. When I asked if you needed help, you just held up that bracelet." Clara touched the bracelet again, remembering. "I was so cold that night." "I knew I couldn't call the police," Sarah continued. "Victor had connections everywhere. I'd heard rumors about missing kids, about the foster system being corrupted. So I made a choice." She reached across the table, taking Clara's hand. "I took you home, cleaned you up, and promised myself I'd never let anyone hurt you again." Clara's lips trembled. "You saved my life." "I'm sorry I kept the truth from you," Sarah whispered. "I was so afraid of losing you, of someone taking you away." Clara stood up and wrapped her arms around Sarah, tears flowing freely now. "You're my mom," she said firmly. "You've always been my mom. I understand why you did it." Luke watched the embrace, his own eyes misty. He cleared his throat. "Sarah, I've been thinking. I have some connections in family court. If you'd like, I could help make Clara's adoption legal. Properly this time." Sarah looked up, stunned. "But after everything that happened—" "You're a good mother," Luke said firmly. "What you did, saving Clara, protecting her all these years, that's what a real parent does. Let me help make it official." Clara's face lit up. "Really? We could be a real family? On paper and everything?" Sarah pulled Clara closer, her voice thick with emotion. "We've always been a real family, sweetheart. The papers will just make everyone else see it too." "And I'll be right here," Luke promised, helping every step of the way. Clara wiped her eyes, looking between Luke and Sarah with newfound understanding of just how much they both cared for her. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of years of unspoken gratitude. Luke watched as Emily hesitated at the park entrance, her hand tightening around his. The old swing set creaked in the gentle breeze, stirring memories of happier times. "This is where we used to come every Saturday," he said softly. "You always wanted the blue swing." Emily's eyes flickered with recognition. "The one with the rubber seat?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's right, sweetie." Luke's heart swelled at this small breakthrough. "You used to say it felt like flying." Clara bounced excitedly beside them, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Can we swing together, Emily?" Emily nodded slowly, taking tentative steps toward the playground. As they approached the swings, a ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I remember. You used to push me so high." Clara settled into the swing next to Emily, kicking her legs to get started. "Look what I drew yesterday." She pulled out her sketchbook, showing Emily a colorful drawing of 3 people holding hands. Emily leaned closer, genuinely interested. "Is that us?" "Uh-huh. See? That's you, and that's me, and that's your dad." Clara pointed to each figure. "Do you like to draw?" I used to," Emily admitted, running her fingers over the paper. "Before—" Luke knelt beside them, his voice gentle. "We could get you some art supplies if you'd like, sweetheart. Clara could show you some techniques she's learned." Clara's face lit up. "Oh yes, I could teach you how to blend colors. Miss Thompson at art class says I'm really good at that." For the first time in weeks, Emily laughed, a small, fragile sound that filled Luke's heart with hope. "Okay," she agreed. "Could we draw the park?" Clara immediately hopped off her swing, spreading her sketchbook on a nearby picnic table. Emily followed, and soon both girls were bent over the paper, Clara showing Emily how to sketch the outline of trees. Luke watched them from a short distance, tears pricking his eyes as Emily gradually relaxed, her shoulders loosening as she focused on the drawing. Clara chattered happily about different art techniques, her natural warmth drawing Emily out of her shell. "Dad?" Emily called out suddenly. "Remember when you bought me ice cream from that truck? The one with the funny music? The one that played Pop Goes the Weasel?" Luke smiled, walking over to join them. "You always wanted the strawberry cone with sprinkles." "It still comes here," Clara exclaimed. "I can hear it now." Sure enough, the familiar tune drifted through the trees. Emily's eyes lit up with recognition, and for a moment, she looked like the carefree little girl she used to be. "Can we?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course," Luke replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Anything you want, sweetheart." As they walked toward the ice cream truck together, Clara showed Emily more drawings from her sketchbook, and Emily pointed out her favorite spots in the park. Luke trailed behind them, watching his daughter slowly emerging from the shadows of her past, guided by Clara's gentle friendship and the comfort of familiar surroundings. The summer sun painted golden streaks across the community park as families gathered for the annual picnic. Checkered blankets dotted the grass, and the air was filled with laughter and the smell of barbecue. Luke sat at a wooden picnic table watching Emily and Clara chase each other around the playground. Sarah arranged paper plates filled with potato salad and hamburgers. "I never thought we'd be here like this," she said softly, glancing at the girls. Luke nodded, his eyes misting. Neither did I. Emily, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon, ran up to the table. Her cheeks were flushed from playing, and her bracelet caught the sunlight as she reached for a glass of lemonade. The same bracelet that had started it all, now back where it belonged. "Everyone!" Emily called out suddenly, climbing onto the bench. The crowd of neighbors and friends turned to face her, their conversations quieting. Luke's heart swelled with pride as his daughter, once so withdrawn, now stood tall before the community. "I want to say something," Emily continued, her voice clear and steady. "A year ago, I didn't think I'd ever feel happy again. I was scared of everything and everyone." She paused, looking down at Luke. "But my dad never gave up on me. He searched for years, and even when others told him to move on, he kept believing." Clara beamed up at Emily, giving her a thumbs up. Emily smiled back before continuing. "And then there's Clara," Emily said, reaching down to squeeze her friend's hand. "She showed me it was okay to laugh again, to draw, to just be a kid. She's not just my friend, she's my little sister." She grinned at Clara, "Even though she's actually older than me by 2 months." The crowd chuckled, and Clara stuck out her tongue playfully. "Someone has to keep you in line." Emily's eyes sparkled with joy as she looked around at the familiar faces. "Thank you all for helping us heal, for bringing meals when we couldn't cook, for understanding when I couldn't go to school right away, for treating me like normal even when I didn't feel normal." Luke stood up and wrapped his arm around Emily's shoulders, steadying her on the bench. She leaned into his embrace, no longer afraid of touch or closeness. "The bracelet my dad gave me," Emily held up her wrist. "It led him to Clara, and Clara led him to me. Sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Clara jumped up to hug Emily, nearly knocking them both over. Luke caught them, holding both girls close as the community applauded. "Ice cream!" someone called out, and the girls scrambled off toward the dessert table, their laughter echoing across the park. Luke watched them go, his heart full. Emily's ponytail bounced as she ran, reminding him of the little girl she once was, while showing him the strong young woman she was becoming. Clara linked arms with her, their friendship a testament to the healing power of love and understanding. If you enjoyed the story of Luke, Emily, and Clara, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.